Well, thanks, Noreen. I really valued this invitation because it was a way of returning home and telling my friends here and students and so on what I have been doing of late, which many of you may not be aware of, since it has less to do with events in the United States than with a project abroad. Basically, this was born, this study of the adaptation process of the second generation in Spain was born out of two concerns. First, I had finished the Children of Immigrants longitudinal study about 2004 and was casting about for something to do next. What do you do next when you finish one project and so on? So looking, and it so happened that I was lecturing in Paris in the fall of 2005 when the city went up in flames. The banlieues exploded, and there were all kinds of trouble in French cities that, to a large extent, were attributed to the discontent among children of immigrants in France. And in a context of a lecture in Sciences Po in Paris, somebody asked me, what is happening here in the suburbs? I don't know. You're supposed to know. You are the French scholars. I can tell you what happened in the United States, but I don't know anything about it. But apparently they did not know much at that time either. So it struck me that there was very little written at the time about a growing a second generation, that is children of immigrants, in the countries that are collectively the second largest reception areas for the new immigration, namely those of Western Europe. Turns out that doing work in Paris on the second generation is something else. I don't advise anybody of you to try it unless you are French and have very big connections, because there are all kinds of problems to do research in France, especially for a North American. And so I decided to retreat to the friendlier and more familiar confines of Spain, which is, of course, my mother tongue, and also where the reception, both by officials and by academics, to the idea of doing this study was much more positive, much more open, and that had certain characteristics that were interesting, because Spain turned out to have, by 2007, about 12% of the population of foreign origin, which is about the same as in the United States, despite the fact that immigration to Spain only started in the 1990s. Anyway, the study of the second generation in Western Europe, as in the United States, presents a series of challenges that differentiates it from research on other more stable adult populations. And first, I'd like to discuss them with you. Because what I'm going to tell you about is what we have done since 2007 in this, and then, if there is time, present some of the results of the study. Acculturation, social adaptation, self-identities among second-generation adolescents are highly dynamic processes that can be expected to change significantly. For that reason, research designs that seek to follow this population over time are preferable to cross-sectional surveys. Static surveys of children of immigrants in early adolescence may well be representative of the universe, but most of the outcomes that are captured at that time, aspirations, self-esteem, attitudes, are soft variables likely to change with time. Conversely, analysis surveys of the second-generation adults are capable of capturing hard outcomes like educational attainment, income, occupation, marital status, runs with the police, and so on, but they censor the proportion of the population in early adulthood that fell by the wayside because of incarceration, other forms of institutionalization, destitution, or leaving the country. Therefore, surveys of children of immigrants in early adulthood tend to censor the samples and to yield, for that reason, excessively optimistic accounts of that process, as had happened several times with static cross-sections of adult second-generation immigrants in the United States. Further, static surveys of young adults have difficulty constructing credible causal models of the factors that lead to each of these hard outcomes, like educational attainment, occupation, and so on, because they depend on respondents' recall in order to construct indicators and predictors such as parental SES in early adolescence, family modes of incorporations, and the like. And of course, selective recalls have all the problems that we are familiar with. On the other hand, longitudinal studies designed to overcome all of these limitations are very difficult and are expensive to carry out. They run the risk of excessive sample mortality in the follow-up surveys that can kill you if you always run this kind of risk when undertaking these enterprises. The longer, of course, the time lag between the initial surveys and successive ones, the greater their substantive value, but also the greater the risk of substantive case loss. For example, a panel study of students with only a 1 year lag between the original and the follow-up, as had been done in replication of SEALs of our own studies in several European countries, are fairly safe in recapturing the sample after a year, but tell you very little because in a 1 year span, there is not much change that will take place. The study in Spain is known as ILSEC, or in Spanish, Investigación Longitudinal de la Segunda Generación. It was deliberately patterned after SEALs, the Children of Immigrants Longitudinal Studies, as a means to develop reliable and valid data about the present situation, prospects of the second generation growing up in Spain. And like SEALs, the study adopted a panel design in order to measure individual change as well as collective change over time. The study is a product of a collaborative effort between the Center for Migration and Development here and the Ortega y Gasset University Institute in Madrid, with the explicit aim of filling the gap in existing research literature, as well as to produce comparative studies with those that had been obtained in the United States. One of our original goals was to see to what extent the mental assimilation model that came out of SEALs data and was presented in several books, including Legacies, 2001, and Immigrant America, travel across the Atlantic. That is whether the model was essentially an American model applicable to the experiences of children of immigrants in this country, or whether it had similarities in the experiences of children in other countries. To this end, we saw the cooperation of the educational authorities of the Spanish communities of Madrid and Barcelona, which are the two largest areas of concentration of immigrants in Spain, called concessions. And they actually were very favorable, inclined to the project, and they granted their support to the point of sending letters to the schools that were selected for the study, requesting their cooperation. So they furnish us with complete list of schools, public and private in Spain, called concerted, both in the central cities of Madrid and Barcelona, and also on the entire metropolitan area. So we could draw from the schools a stratified random sample of schools as a step one in the survey, and then within each school, we could, after obtaining the cooperation of the principal and the teachers, identify the students that were foreign-born and had arrived in Spain before age 12, bring them all into a room, distribute the questionnaires with the supervision of two members of the staff, and instead of having one-to-one interviews, get 50 or 60 interviews at a time, because the questionnaires were, in that sense, self-administered. Second generation, for purpose of the study, was defined as children that were born in the country, that is Spain, or brought to the country before age 12, with at least one foreign-born parent. By convention, those that are born in the country of foreign parentage are known as a second generation proper. Those who come from abroad at an early age are known as the 1.5 generations. Most children of immigrants in Spain attend public schools, but there is a sizable sample that go to what are known as private concerted schools, mostly religious schools administered by religious orders. And so one of the questions that we had were the extent to which there were differences in the process of adaptation between kids going to public school and those going to private ones. In total, 180 schools took part in this study, 101 in Madrid and 79 in Barcelona. 111 were public schools and the rest were private. Basic secondary education in Spain is compulsory, and that's a good thing because students at that age, in basic secondary education, most kids are still in school. So a sample drawn from schools is coterminous with a sample of that age level. You don't have to, there is not much school dropping out at that age, so you can fairly say that by drawing this sample of schools in a sort of a stratified random sample and then interviewing everyone, you are getting to you can make a credible case that the resulting sample is representative of the universe at large, namely children of immigrants, second generation and 1.5 between the ages of 12 and 17. The total sample size was the total that we got was almost 7,000, 6,905 cases, 3,375 in Madrid, 3,530 in Barcelona. So this, with a constant sampling fraction across the schools, the sample is self-weighting with respect to the total universe of interest. Of course, it excludes immigrants and their children in other areas of Spain, but it includes the two largest concentrations in the country. And hey, you can only do so much with the money that you get from foundation these days, both here and there. Approximately 1 year after the completion of this student survey, we undertook a new study of their parents to complement those obtained from the children. To that end, letters were sent to the home addresses that were supplied by the kids with an attached questionnaire to be completed by parents. The letter explained the goals of the project, blah, 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 and offer a monetary reward in the form of a money prize drawn by lottery among those who fulfilled the questionnaire. And then we sent, several reminders were sent by mail with catastrophic results. We ended up with having only 700 cases out of a goal of interviewing 25% of parents from the original one. So that wasn't too good. Our original goal was 1,750. So the team, the field team had to work out the phones, and they manned the phones for the entire summer and fall of 2010, calling home numbers in Madrid and Barcelona, while keeping a moving tally of completed questionnaires to ensure that they would be roughly balanced between both cities and among the major nationalities in the immigrant population in Spain. And that actually, all those months of field work paid off. In total, we had that is a sample of 1,843 parents, or 28% of the original student survey, with the major nationalities being practically identical to those in the student survey. The major ones were Ecuadorians, 28%, Moroccans, 11%, Colombians, 8%, Peruvians, 7 Dominicans, about 6, and Romanians, about 5, which is about the same as among parents. Here is a characteristics of, that is a breakdown of the characteristics of parental sample. The only thing that I need to explain to you there is, briefly, is this knowledge of Spanish. This is an index constructed by the sum of reported ability to speak, understand, read, and write Spanish, self-reported, 1 to 4 divided by 4, based on the idea that self-reports of language ability are generally reliable indicators. They have been found as, and the index is well behaved in terms of its correlations with other variables, as well as predictive capacity, the alpha internal consistency coefficient is about 0.8. So it's a rather good, well-behaved measure. 3 years after the original survey that took place in 2008 and 9, the follow-up was launched. The purpose was to obtain information on the set of adaptation outcomes in the strategic school-to-work transition. In Spain, about age 18, a lot of kids leave school to enter the labor market, especially earlier on. So that's when we wanted to capture them. By the end of secondary school, those who went into the academic track and continue in different forms, and those that had actually were leaving school to begin their career in the labor market. So that is the average age at that time of the follow-up was 17 or 18. I want to tell you something about the process of tracking a large sample like this. We learned some things about this process that I think may be useful to some of you. Again, the two school superintendencies, called in Spain consejerías, in Madrid and Barcelona, were very helpful, agreed to collaborate with the follow-ups, send letters, and so on. And once letters were sent to the target schools, the next step was to send teams of 2 interviewers to each target schools, formed by experienced interviewers whose task was first to identify and re-interview all the original respondents that were still in school. Second, to try to obtain information about those who had left. Third, to identify other students that were also second generation and interview them as well, and fourth, to select and interview a sample of native parentage students in order to have a comparative sample of Spaniards of native parentage. One of the criticism that I got a lot, both Ruben and I from SEALS, is that SEALS did not have a native parentage sample. I have always disagreed with that in the case of the US, but in the case of Spain, it made a lot of sense because there was not a lot of data from other surveys about this population, so it was worthwhile for us to try to gain a native parentage sample. This phase of the project took place in metropolitan Madrid during October 2011 and January 2012, and in Barcelona from February to May 2012. In effect, the school survey sought to accomplish 3 goals. First, to create a panel of individuals tracked over time. Second, to create a cross-sectional panel by adding a replacement sample of second-generation youth to complement for those who were lost in the follow-up. And third, to create a comparative sample of native parentage youth. While this school-based effort was quite satisfactory in creating a native parentage sample and a replacement second-generation sample, it fell short of the first goal, namely to track our original respondents, which was really what we wanted to do. Many had left or had moved to other schools. So from the initial survey, we had personal identifiers for over 5,000 cases, names and telephone numbers that provided the basis for the next phase of the study. That phase started before the termination of the first school survey in Madrid and concurrently with it in Barcelona, and consisted of telephone calls to track and interview other respondents. And for that purpose, we put the entire survey team to make phone calls like the earlier time. Interviewers read each respondent an introductory statement emphasizing the voluntary character of their participation and emphasizing also the incentive to do so. The incentive in this case were 3 prizes drawn by lottery of 1,500 euros each, which turned out to be a pretty good size sum in the present context of a country in crisis. While the second generation, the replacement sample and native parentage samples were completed without difficulties, without school visits, that phase of the study plus the second one based on telephone interviews had only very limited success in locating our original respondent. In Madrid, for example, by March 2012, we had only 793 retrieved cases out of an original traceable sample of 3,002. And I was quaking in my boots, and everybody was trembling about this because this was going nowhere. That is, we were going to have to report to all the funders, Spencer and Son, that we tried. Guys, this is the first time something like this is done in Europe, and there were not enough institutional bases, so we are done. At that moment, that is in For Seals, we hired private companies, and since we had Social Security and other identifiers, we were able to track the sample. But there's nothing like that in Spain. There are some private companies, but they are not very reliable in terms of protecting the confidentiality of the information. Then some of the young members of the research team make the following observation that certainly would escape the old-time principal investigators like myself. Namely, they turned out and said, look, all the kids here are in Facebook and 20. Everybody has a page. Instead of going to all, let's try the social network to see what happens. And basically, from there on, using the names of original respondents as basic data, internet searches were organized in each of these networks. After a match was made, then the message was sent to each of the kids, inviting them to become friends. And if the invitation had three outcomes, they could accept. If the invitation was accepted, a second message was sent explaining the purpose of the study, the incentives to participate. And at that point, three contingencies could occur. The kid could agree to fill the questionnaire either online or by phone. The person identified was not the original respondent. So what's the difference? You know, you have to see how many Juan Perez you're going to get before you get the right one. And third, the person identified was the original respondent but objected or raised questions about what is this all about. If that last alternative, then a whole process started of online chats between a member of the research team and the interviewer explaining the purpose of the project and so on, and referring the person to the project's webpage in each of the networks. The most popular networks in Spain are Facebook and not Twitter, 20. Which is, this is, for example, the project, the Facebook webpage of the ILSEC project. That's the front page for Facebook. Most of this process was successful, leading to an acceptance. Interaction, however, with located respondents did not end up in their filling up their questionnaire online or telephone, and you're going out of here. But no, it was not there. That was not what happened. That is, they were then invited by the ILSEC team to form part of the team. That is, to become part of the study. This network building process took several forms. First, sending regular messages informing the respondents that had responded of how the project was going on and welcoming new participants. Second, the creation of a project blog, a blog where respondents were invited to post photos, poems, stories about themselves, relations with others, and so on. And third, a request to them to give us other leads to other school peers, people who had been, and see what happens. Here is the, this is the 20 webpage. This is the blog. It's the front page that gives the welcome and so on. And then there were pages in which kids could sort of post their stories and so on. So to stimulate referrals, then we set up a process of emulation among graduates of different schools. So the list of schools were posted in the blog, and the number of respondents for each blog, and then those who had responded were stimulated to provide other leads so that their schools could win. That is how far is your school ahead in this project and how they are winning, and it worked. That is that they went on and this and that. Yes.
Posted the names of the schools?
Yes.
Really, that's very unusual in sort of.
That's
not disclose that in the U.S.
Well, in Spain we did not see any difficulty in not. The schools are public information. That is, the schools that were selected. The problem is that you could not post the names of the kids. Anyway, so we got a lot of message and so on, and this internet tracking effort had several important consequences. It increased dramatically the number of respondents. This actually saved the follow-up. It became itself a source of information about our sample, among the things that kids told about themselves and posted and so on. So that was a novel source of information. And third, it sort of created an emergent phenomenon in which not only there were these interactions between the project team and the respondents, but among the respondents themselves. So you know what that's happened. So this is still going on. So it was a kind of an emergent phenomenon out of this thing that, hey, for those of us who have had to work with telephone and individual interviews, this was really novel. How the new generation in Spain would react to that. And to give you an idea, let's see if I have the figure. What happened to the figure? Well, it disappeared. I wanted to give you that is an idea of the complexity of the process. That is a kind of a flow chart of how the project of tracking the sample all to this point. But we did not have it. And here, nevertheless, this was the result throughout these various means, from school visits to telephone interviews to tracking the samples through the social networks. The field team, not me, the field team managed to retrieve 3,811 cases, or 73% of the original traceable sample by the end of field work in November 2012. By way of comparison, the first SEALS follow-up survey in the US retrieved 81.5% after 3 years, and the second follow-up on 69%. As we know, national panels in the US routinely secure data from 60 to 70% of original respondents. Here you have a breakdown of the follow-up sample by please. No, that's not. I want to get to the thing. Well, I have one. I have my own. This is not it. I haven't gotten there. Okay, here is the interviewed in a school, telephone interviews, leads by school personnel, social networks, and leads by other social networks. So these were what saved the follow-up. Here is the size of the replacement sample, native parity sample, giving us a total of over 7,000 cases in this, which is a mountain of data on which we're working right now. And of course, I think that it was a successful venture, but so far, but it leads to a lot of additional work. The first thing is to check for sample mortality. How representative is the follow-up from the original one? And to do that, we follow the same methodology used in SEALS, comparing first the two samples over a series of objective variables measured in the first survey, and that's what the next table presents. So here you have a series of basic variables and the correlation between that is indicating the size of the difference between the two samples. Kramer's V it's relatively, that is, it seldom exceeds 0.10 in the differences between, over a number of variables between the two samples. That is the original sample of over 6,000 cases and the follow-up sample. Here is the second part. You can see the differences, the actual differences, and the follow-up. Another test for sample attrition is simply constructing a variable missing in the follow-up and correlating it with a series of objective predictors at time one. That is that's a familiar thing. And the results of correlating missing in the follow-up with time one predictors is here. These are the correlations. And as you can see, generally, they are very low. So it doesn't seem to be a great deal of bias in the follow-up after losing about 25% of the sample. And here you have the nationalities, with the only exception of those, that is country of birth, I mean, with the only exception of those who were born in Spain, that is the second generation proper, that there is a 3% difference between the original sample and the follow-up. The other nationalities are very similar, are impressively similar. So I think that the Kramer's V coefficient exceeds 0.10 in this case is 0.13, but that is primarily due to the large number of national categories. And I present this to give you an idea of how diverse this second generation population is in a country that only 20 years ago had no immigrants. That is how, what an immense social phenomenon had happened in Spain, in which in 1990, it was a country of out-migration, and all of a sudden starts coming in, and you have not only 12% of the population foreign-born, but this diversity. Now, there is people from all over the world at that time. And so far, it remains to be seen how many are going to remain, because given the crisis in the country, there is evidence that a lot of immigrants are departing. But the study was conducted in a sense of a pre-crisis situation from 2008 to 2012. By that time, very few people had left, and very few children of immigrants. If not, we would not have. And actually, we were able to locate some kids abroad through the Facebook and 20. That is, we were able to locate it and interview them online. Most of those that we located in other countries had not left because of poverty or unemployment and so on. They had left in order to go to a university back home because they could not get access to the Spanish university system, or had gone to get schools, that is further education, rather than escaping the crisis situation. Things may be changing in 2013. Yes, Tom.
Why is it that Ecuador so dominates this list?
That's because that is interestingly, that's the way it is. We took the sample and sort of.
But I mean, are there some special?
Yeah, there was. What happened was the Ecuadorians were coming in, there was a banking crisis and oil crisis. Ecuadorians were coming to the U.S., and then we were saturated. They were coming illegally, and then they started to go to Spain. So when Spain opened the door, there was also a recruitment in Ecuador to bring them in for agriculture that was regulated by the government. So once you open up those doors, they'll bring your brothers and their sisters and their nephews and their cousins.
They require a special visa, so they can just get on a plane and go.
That is, the Ecuadorian government has repeatedly indicated that there was a deliberate process of recruitment, as Marta was mentioned, of laborers in Ecuador to replace Moroccans and so on that were seen as preferable until it ended. And when it ended, it ended. But it led to a very significant presence of Ecuadorians in the immigration population, and apparently in the second generation, at least in Madrid and Barcelona. Well, a final fortunate twist is that the replacement sample designed to compensate for sample attrition turned out to closely resemble the follow-up as well. There was no reason that we had to anticipate that pattern, since the replacement sample was collected exclusively in schools, while many members of the original sample had left school at that time. Yet, as results in these tables show, the two samples, the replacement and the follow-up, are similar over an array of important variables. This is presented in the correlation with survey type. The only difference is enroll in school, because obviously the replacement sample was located entirely in schools, while the follow-up sample was located in schools and outside of it. So that's the only difference. But otherwise, the correlations are relatively low. This is the differences by nationality. And And in that case, in synthesis, with the predictable exception of current school enrollment, which is universal among new respondents, but only partial among original ones, there is a great similarity between the two samples, so that we conclude that their members can be considered as part of the same general universe of second-generation youth by age 17, and that the sample can be merged, that is the follow-up and replacement in subsequent analysis when necessary to increase statistical power. So in synthesis, the 2012 surveys were fairly successful, and we're very happy with it. Because with that, we don't even have to do a lot of censoring corrections for censoring, since the follow-up appears fairly representative of the original one. Since then, teams here and at the University of Miami and in Spain have been working with this data with a mountain of relevant outcomes. And obviously, I don't have time to tell you much about it, but let me tell you a few things. That is, after having walked you through the story of the ILSEC project and letting you know that it resides here, perhaps it may be interesting to discuss some of these findings. So the first one, I'd like to note that these are simply bits and pieces of the results that are kind of interesting. Educational aspiration and expectations over time, since we have a longitudinal study on the second generation. And what happens? What happens is that in the course of adolescence, to our surprise, ambition grew. That is, consistently girls perform much better, have higher ambition, and so on. That is, like elsewhere, girls are doing much better educationally, including educational aspirations and expectations. But even among boys, the trend is observable, especially in the categories of aspirations, of course, means ideal goals. And you can see that in 2008, this is the pattern. And then in 2012, 4 years later, 26%, a significant increase in ideal goals, also occurring among males, despite the fact that they tend to have lower goals, and females. Expectations are realistic goals. This is the variable that really predicts in terms of causal analysis of actual educational attainment, occupation, and so on. Realistic expectations are a very powerful predictor. And the same, you have the original sample 4 years later. Perhaps there are two possible ways of interpreting these results. One is that indeed, as kids got older, they became more realistic, and they thought that they really could attain what they did not think they could attain earlier on in life. The other is that since they cannot get a job because the labor market has simply dried up, they have decided to stay in school and sort of aim at that. At this time, I cannot tell you what is happening, but I think that earlier in 2008, school principals complained that they could not retain the kids because the jobs were so plentiful. Those jobs disappear, and it may be that this rise in ambition, which is a very important predictor later on, may in part have to do with the inability of other things. But that remains to be seen, and that is a very good predictor. Here is another item that I wanted to discuss, drawn from the parentals, comparing the aspirations and the expectations of parents and aspirations and expectations of kids in 2010. And what you have there is what this data show is that parents are much more ambitious than their kids at that time. That is that immigrant parents, just like it happened in SEALs in the United States, they dream the world. Even if they come from very modest origins, they expect their kids to have university levels education and postgraduate degrees, both in Madrid and Barcelona. These are aspirations. The kids are much more sanguine. That is, they are not so convinced. At least they were not there. They are much less optimistic, and the same thing for realistic expectations. For that is these are parents. These are parents generally of very modest origins who are working blue-collar occupations and so on with relatively modest education, and yet they, almost half, expected their kids to go to the university and move on. But as you can see, the kids are much less optimistic of their chances of going in the university and planning other things. That gap in ambition from parents to children it struck me as very interesting. On the other hand, parents thought that once they had arrived in Spain, they had made it. And so this is a place of destination where they expected themselves and their kids to live overwhelmingly the rest of their lives. But their kids saw Spain as a platform. At least in 2010, the majority, that is, there were as many who planned to live in North America than those who planned to remain in Spain. So basically, this is a question inconceivable in the United States. How can you ask, when you arrive here, second-generation kids are going here to stay, they're going to become Americans and so on? Well, at least in 2010, we have a case in which many second-generation kids in Spain were planning at least to live for a while. That I found alarming, and actually asked quite a few school principals about it to try to provide context to these surprising findings that so many second generation want to do. And I think that they clarified the situation for me after these talks. As one school principal said, but our kids also plan to leave. What's wrong? There's nothing wrong with it, because our kids also want to move to Europe or go somewhere abroad. So this is normal. And this is one of the first indications that we had that was confirmed in the follow-up, that the second generation in Spain was becoming integrated into the universe of young people in the country almost without problems, and they were pretty much part of the same thing. I was going to go through some impressive structural equation models, but I will pass them on in the interest of that is giving some time. I'll speak for 5 more minutes and then stop, so that there is some. This is a table that predicts real outcomes. That is the first outcome is whether the kids were still enrolled in school by the time of the follow-up. That's a real thing. About 15% had dropouts in the follow-up. So what are the predictors of remaining enrolled in schools? This is binary logistic regression. The second column is whether they were enrolled different levels, not enrolled in basic secondary and enrolled in advanced secondary or university. And the third are the log of academic grades. That's an objective outcome that they could have. And the story here, what I wanted to point in this second column, is that is parental variables, especially parental ambition, carries. Even after you control, this is for children variables. These are objective traits of children. And in the second slide, I'll present the psychosocial traits like self-esteem and ambition. And of course, objective traits and psychosocial traits of the kids have impact on each of these educational outcomes, but still, parental expectations linger. So this is an interesting factor, that even after the parental variables are not entirely filtered by children's results, either in the likelihood of remaining in school and not dropping out, in the likelihood of advancing to advanced secondary and the university, and in their grades. Just to show you the second, this is the rest of the regression. I just could not fit it. But these are also children variables that are predictable of the tree. And of course, educational expectations at age 14 in the original survey is a very strong predictor of what is going to happen. I told you before, ambition really counts. And the way that I think that it happens is that if the kids are ambitious and want to reach the university and get a higher education by age 14, they may achieve it, or if they are not ambitious at age 14, they are not going to get there. It's like a necessary condition in this case, and you can see the very strong effects of child's own educational expectation, but that of parents remains there.
Look at the Chinese, you have the Chinese as the only, is that the only ethnicity that is statistically significant?
The only
Which
ethnicity.
is contrary to what Jessica had argued before, that they had under lower expectations, right?
Right. I think that that is what we found is that is a very interesting pattern of adaptation of the Chinese second generation Chinese that is completely different from everyone. On the one hand, there is a Chinese effect. The proportion of the Chinese leaving school is higher than everyone else. That is the proportion of abandoning school. And the reason is because of pressure by the parents to join them in the store. And the belief of the parents that they cannot make it in Spain through the educational system, so we are going to make it through our own entrepreneurship. So a big chunk of the second generation Chinese drops out of school. But those who stay, despite the parents' pressure and so on, do better than everybody else. This is something that Jessica had been interested in this, and this is the only nationality. We included in these regressions every nationality that had at least 50 cases in the original sample, and the only one that came out significant is this one. Thank you. And the last thing that I want to point out, since we are not going to go through these models, is these two factors. Do you call yourself Spanish at a that is? What is a question of national self-identity among these children? Among those born in Spain, of course, 4/5 are already call themselves Spanish. They were born in the country and they identify. But note what happened among those who, the 1.5 generation. In 2008, only 22%. By 2012, almost half. So that's good news. This for a country that is in the middle of a crisis and so on, that there doesn't seem to be resistance to integrate into the universe of the second generation. That is, it's over time. This indicates a paced process of identification and assimilation, also shown by this data on perceptions of discrimination. During the last 4 years, during adolescence, how often have you been discriminated against? 5%. Not varying by sex, not the same thing in the follow-up sample, and in the replacement sample, and without any difference from the native parentage sample. These are Spaniards who are children of Spaniards, and they have about the same thing, so there is no particular difference between them. In a sense, you don't see, with the exception of some nationalities like Equatorial Guinea, which is sub-Saharan African, and Dominicans, that tend to have higher perception of discrimination. By and large, very low experiences or report of discrimination. We read this data. These, of course, are simple tabulations, but we have done much more other analysis of this to indicate that Spain may have been doing a lot of terrible things in terms of the economic management and so on, but in terms of integrating its immigrant population, and especially the second generation, the story has been generally positive. That is, there has been a sort of seamless process of adaptation in which, in one indicator after another, the second generation youth are pretty much like the third generation, like the Spaniards. There is no, and that, of course, and I conclude that, runs entirely contrary to my theory. We see no evidence of a sizable group in Spain undergoing downward assimilation, as we saw in the United States. It goes there. There is evidence that some groups are performing better than others, especially if they have higher levels of human capital in the parental generation and certain and other variables. But overall, the process is relatively uniform with that is experienced with native Spaniards in terms of their own ambition, their views of how they are seen and their performance in school. There is relatively, there is a very small gap in terms of average grades and so on. And I can provide additional evidence if you're interested on this, but I think I'll better stop here.